And Valentine. Time for us to go into Freshly Pressed, which is a detailed analysis and stories in our newspapers this morning. And joining us to do justice to that, we have Ikemesit. Good morning, Ikemesit.
Hey, morning Val, morning Lagos.
All right, Ikemesit Effiong coming through strong there. Good morning.
Okay.
All right,
It's a coffee.
As always, you just ginger and ready to
Blame
go.
it on the coffee.
Fantastic, we love it. That's how a Wednesday should be. We also have Devoe Okorie in the studio with us. Good morning,
Good
Devoe.
morning, Lagos. Cool crooked Congress.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that preamble. Lagos, join the conversation by sending a message on Twitter. Our handle is at Smooth91FM. The hashtag is FreshlyPressed981. And you can send a message to our WhatsApp number, which will be tweeted on our Twitter handle as well. And yeah, that's it. Yeah, so we'll start with this first story from ThisDay. The story talks about the federal government seeking funds from other countries and the precisely Exim Bank of Russia for the railway projects. And this is coming on the heels of the announcement or address that was given by the Minister of Transportation, Rotimi Amechi. He revealed yesterday that President Muhammadu Buhari gave him approval to source for loans to look for money. In one statement he made that I found really interesting, he said, I went to India to look for money. For this project.
Simple, he did.
Yeah. So, Devoe, let's go into this.
Well, I think it's what they call a performance management report. Amechi here, remember he's a super minister. Let's not lose the fact that he has a wide brief from the presidency to deliver transport, maritime, aviation, etc. Now, here he has been searching, as you know, the budget has not been funded, especially for infrastructure projects. And he's given an update after a 3-year movement that this is what this administration has been able to accomplish. And they've stated that the president gave them approval to go ahead with negotiations to raise about $46 billion, which was meant to fund the railway modernization across the country. Yes. Now, for people to note clearly the map of this railway, you have the Lagos Kano, okay, that's from here to the north. You have the Lagos Calabar to the southeast, and then from the Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. So it's a fully work plan to ensure that movement of goods and services and also people around the country easily. As you do know, once we're able to fix the railway, transport calamities should have been reduced to a large extent and also cheapened. Now he was there with the Minister of Information. They did mention that along the way, especially between the Lagos to Kano route, would be some major obstructions, which include buildings that have to move pipelines, petroleum pipelines that move products, pipe-borne water pipelines, sewages, bridges, and most especially the 81 base ordnance corps. That's the military base. Yes. Now, they also said that there is a deadline, especially for between the Lagos and the Ibadan routes, that this should have been completed by December. I like the fact that the first time that the federal government is giving us dates that we can work with.
Realistic timelines, maybe.
So they're saying that the money has been made available for this, and that by December there's no going back. They want to complete that already, because while they were there, they were at the Ibadan Railway.
They want to complete in December.
Railway.
That's the
Lagos Ibadan
stretch.
extra,
Lagos Ibadan stretch, and that the Chinese who were already working on it, which had funded the Lagos Kano, were already laying about 1.5 kilometers of track daily. Now, while the Chinese are funding the Lagos Kano, that's why he was in India, also talking to the Russians as well as a bit of the Americans to see whether they could raise funding to complete this.
Doesn't it seems like he's being proactive, and it's sharing news. It gives me, good feelings.
I don't want to
about,
I don't want to
we
put
don't want
the
to
word,
jump the gun.
No. I don't want to put the word proactive and Amechi in the same sentence.
Why?
They're not,
When somebody does well,
They are ill-fitting.
they should have gone much further than this.
All right.
Funding is actually, I don't want to say funding is not difficult, but funding responds to the seriousness of the government.
But people
at
give
hand.
money to who they trust, don't they?
Not just who they trust, people who are serious about transactions, people who are serious about repayments and co.
Thank you very
But
much.
let's watch out till December. And see
Yeah,
whether that
we'll
will
watch. December is not so far away. Anyway, Lagos, you can send a message to WhatsApp 0809-444-0981. That's 0809-444-0981. The next one, it kind of said, I'll come to you with this one from Guardian. Lake Chad communities accuse troops of eloping with girls, women. This is a report from the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP. Yesterday in Maiduguri, they noted the lack of professionalism on the part of the security forces and alleged misconduct on several instances, reportedly resulting in insufficient trust between them and the communities. And they said they've accused the troops deployed to fight insurgency in the area, and in the same vein, asking for more troops to be deployed to that area. How do we balance this out?
Well, you need troops in the area because the entire Lake Chad Basin, as part of the wider Sahel region of Western Central Africa, is awash with a myriad of insecurity issues. But what the report by the UNDP is essentially highlighting is the fact that across almost all the countries that are involved, in this case, you have security forces who are ostensibly there to keep the peace and to confront these armed elements, right? Essentially contributing towards the breakdown of the trust and the relationship with the host communities. The report highlighted an example in Cameroon where a woman gave birth to a child that was fathered by a soldier and she was ostracized from the community. There was an instance in Chad where residents felt that the breakdown of trust between communities and security agencies has led to communities not exactly feeding the security agencies with credible information on potential Boko Haram cells and elements in that region. And you have a situation where the reporter said they have observed an increase in domestic violence and abuse in some communities in parts of Borno and Adamawa state here in Nigeria. And so we have all across the region, irrespective of the nationality of the security forces that are involved, there is clearly a behavioral and attitudinal problem. And what this report essentially serves to highlight is the fact that this needs to be addressed as part of the wider efforts towards bringing peace and security to that region. And so you cannot have a situation where the soldiers say, oh, okay, we're there to do this work, and so would act anyhow and will act with impunity, and there will be no consequences attached to it, and they will stand a chance of being successful. That's essentially what the report is at.
Which really underscores the need for professionalism and observance of ethics, really, in their approach.
Yeah, indeed. The key word there is observance of ethics, because the report talked about security operatives must be made to adhere to a code of conduct. I do know from facts, because we've done work in this region, my organization, that, for example, the Nigerian military does have a code of conduct and a code of ethics. Whether it's been actually complied with, or it's been observed more in the breach, is left for the observers.
We've got a few messages coming through very quickly, so let's see if we can get into them. This one is in from MI from Akoka, who says, not a big fan of Russia. Looking for money shouldn't cause us to be so desperate. And Devoe, just like you rightly pointed out, which is easier, getting the National Assembly to get the budget ready or going cap in hand to the abroad countries. Let's see how this pans out, especially with the slated timelines. While this is in from Leo, who says, I'm going to Russia to borrow. Russia, be careful. Russia and steal. While Azu says the money that Rotimi went to look for, it's chopping. Which kind of railway money be that? Has our money finished in Nigeria? 7 billion naira recovered loot plus other funds littered about here and there. I beg, he will just go and collect money and they will pilfer it before it's made public and declare 60% of the actual money as what they got next.
He noted that the money, they don't use private money, which probably infers the government money to carry on projects like this.
Well, let's see. Let's move on.
Moving on now to Punch. I'll stick with you with this one. This one talks about Nigerian migrants, 17 precisely, that were saved, rescued at sea. They survived a deadly sea crossing last year, and they've decided to file a lawsuit against Italy for violating their rights. In their words, they said violating their rights by supporting Libya's effort to return them to the North African country. Now, they're being represented in this case by 4 lawyers and several humanitarian groups involved. We know that this case could take up to 3 years before it's drawn to conclusion. Can we see what's the takeaway from this?
It's interesting. So first and foremost, the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms is one of the more liberal conventions that we have there. Worth noting that we have one here in Africa, the Africa Charter on Human and People's Rights. That is very little enforced, by the way. So these guys are essentially claiming that, subject to Articles 3 on the prohibition of torture, Article 4 on the prohibition of slavery and forced labor, and Article 5 on the rights to liberty and security, Italy, knowing fully well that their living conditions when they are handed over to the Libyan Coast Guard and the Libyan Coast Guard deliver them to Libya will be significantly impaired, still went ahead to do this. And Italy, which is a party to this convention, essentially has the right to protect these guys. What might come up though during the legal proceedings is that I don't know if I want to be certain that the lawyers have done their homework on this, but there's an article in that same convention, Article 15, on the which is titled Derogation in Times of Emergency, and essentially states that in time of war or other public emergency threatening the life of the nation, any high contracting power, in this case Italy, may take measures derogating from its obligations under the convention to the extent strictly required by the exigencies of the situation, provided that such measures are not inconsistent with its other obligations under international law. And we do know that under international law and practice, it is subject to a treaty or an arrangement between two countries, right? It is legally possible for a country to send peoples that it does not want within its borders to another country. Right?
That's part of its protection.
Yeah. Now, the question then becomes, is Italy culpable for the internal governing arrangements in Libya such that it has to take cognizance of that, or it has to prevail on Libya to treat peoples that it has handed over to it and it's within Libyan borders appropriately, or as they would be treated in Italy, which is a party to this treaty? And let's note, Libya is not a party to this convention, right? You know, to make that argument would be essentially to state that Italy should be a part of internal self-government in Libya, which would be a stretch. But it will be interesting to see. All of these things will come up, all of these technicalities and legal niceties will come up during the proceedings. Like you said, it may take up to 3 years if they are successful. And Italy has actually lost a case in the past with respect to its migration and deportation practices with respect to migrants. And so there is some precedent to support the notion that Italy might be liable to pay these 70 Nigerian migrants damages. Yeah, as it were. But it's been interesting to
watch.
Of course, evidence of might.
Huge might.
Yeah, huge might. They are going to court.
Because at the time that maybe previous cases would have gone through, it hadn't yet been a crisis in Europe. There's a refugee movement. So we'll see how that goes.
Indeed.
Our next story, Ikemesit, I think you're my favorite person on this one.
Yeah.
From Punch, I'm sorry. From Punch. The headline says 23 states yet to fully comply with CPS. That's a statement from PenCom.
Yeah.
Now, this is in relation to the contributory pension scheme established by the Pension Reform Act of 2004 and contained in a statement showing the status of implementation of the CPS by states obtained from the National Pension Commission. In elaborating this, Ikemesit, what are the implications that we might see from this story?
Well, essentially, okay, let's break down what the CPS is. So the CPS is essentially an arrangement where both the employee and the employer contribute towards the payment of the employee's pensions benefits. Now, the minimum contribution for the employees is 18%, from the employer side 10%, from the employee side 8%. Now, this arrangement came about due to the defects of the old defined benefit scheme, which was prevalent, during the military era. Essentially, is when you had a situation where governments, both federal and state, were owing lots of pensions. As a matter of fact, a lot of the pensions that are currently being owed by the federal government and the state government actually derived from the old defined benefit scheme and not exactly from the CPS, because the way the CPS is structured and is arranged is under the superintendence of the PenCom. There are strict rules and guidelines under the Pension Reform Act 2004 as amended that deal with the supervision and the management of the scheme. Pension operators in the industry are more tightly regulated. As a matter of fact, the CPS is one of the more how do I put it? One of the more bright spots in terms of, the overall economic arrangement. And it's a bit saddening that you've got out of these 23 states, and so there are different grades of non-implementation. You've got 13 out of these 23 states have enacted laws to guide the implementation of the CPS, but they've not started implementing. You've got states like Bayelsa, Enugu, Adamawa, or Sokoto. 8 states have commenced the framework for the implementation with bills that are pending before the State House of Assembly. You got folks like Borno, Cross River, and Akwa Ibom in that category. Yobe has not done anything, so Yobe is the outlier on this. All of the other states commenced full remittance of pensions. Yours truly, our state here legally with Edo and Ekiti are also into that. It's worth noting again. It's concerning. You have this in the books, you have this in the laws, and all of that. And these states are simply supposed to domesticate and pay. It's understandable considering the wider economic challenges that lots of states are facing. And lots of states are cash strapped, as it were, and so it might be hard for them to meet up their own commitments. But another subtext in which to notice is that the states are supposed to not only remit their own parts, but they are also supposed to deduct the employee contribution aspect of it, right? And there are some states that are not even remitting the employee deductions. So the deductions, you see the deductions of your paycheck, right? But the PenCom doesn't have it on their
Reality,
database,
Wow.
and
Wow.
and so it's crazy.
Thank you so
What
much,
the-
Ikemesit.
The
Thank
CPS
you.
is still moving on. 390,000 people have signed
Signed
up
up
since
for
the
it.
beginning of the year.
Just say you
Thank
can
you.
report to PenCom, just letting you guys know.
Yeah.
Let's move on. We've got a few messages that are coming through. Do remember you can send us your messages to our WhatsApp number, which is 0809 444 0981. We've also tweeted that number to you. Or if you'd like to tweet at us, just use the hashtag FreshlyPressed981. And don't forget, we're streaming live on YouTube, so you can comment on our YouTube stream as well. Gwingus, regular, he sends in this WhatsApp message to say, why do we have so much infrastructural deficit in this country? What happened to the billions of dollars earned over the year? What exactly have our leaders done? The monies to better done with the money to better the lives of the common is executed.
Thank
They
you,
say
Aya.
our railway lines will be done in December. I'm preparing to purchase my ticket. Just let me know to go.
Exactly. Ibadan first.
And that's my home, so it's okay. Up next from ThisDay newspaper, let's switch lanes, talk about crude. Devoe, are you ready for this? The NNPC are denying bankrolling fuel subsidy regime, and now they've, even though there has been indication that landing cost for petrol is between 160 and 170 naira per litre, the official price remains 145 naira per litre. People are confused as to what is going on as the administration of President Buhari continues to deny the payment of fuel subsidy. And of course, Parliament is saying, if there's no appropriation for this, so if you are paying subsidy, this is completely unconstitutional. But again, the COO has responded very clearly and categorically saying an NPC does not pay subsidy.
Almost every aspect of government seems to be drama, seems to be well scripted Nollywood movies. I shudder at the quality of the actors or the players in our government.
But the scripts are good.
Yes, because you see, this article here talks about there's a 2-day forum going on where the House of Representatives is investigating the turnaround maintenance status quo,
Yes.
so to speak. So you have the NNPC president defending, saying that that their NNPC subsidy. And the chairman of the committee asks again, tries in so many ways just to find out how come if you're landing fuel at 170 and selling pump price at 145,
What is going on?
obviously what is going on.
What's the magic?
And the COO responds again, the NNPC does not pay subsidy. Now, does it take, now, I don't understand what's going on here. Does it take the chairman or the committee involved to understand how the Ministry of Petroleum works? The PPRA sets the templates, does the payments based on this. Of course, there's a payment being done. Or how else would they land it? Are foreigners giving us petroleum products free of charge or on loan? Come on, how can you ask such questions? Because the truth is, the NNPC doesn't pay subsidy. It's not the NNPC; they're not part of the value chain. So, it beggars questions as to what level of review is this, and the quality of questions being asked, and the ignorance being shown by the committee at large. Well, I don't know what they were trying to achieve here by asking questions that have obvious answers. Well, they went on and discussed the state of the four refineries that NNPC still maintained their stand that the strategy was to do the turnaround maintenance, which they've asked for a lot of money for, as against building new ones. Now, the committee then eventually said, okay, fine, if you're going to go ahead with this for us to be able to sanction and give a go-ahead, we want to see a 5-year, they asked for the billion-dollar question, not billion-dollar question. When you ask for something that you can't get, I don't know what that's called in English. They asked NNPC, let me repeat, they asked NNPC for an audit of 5 years. What we know NNPC for is lack of transparency. The NNPC is a black horse. You cannot get audited reports from NNPC. You're not God. NNPC is.
Only God can.
Yes,
Well, this
how
is
can-
interesting. So, Devoe, do you ever see a time? Because I mean, we have seen a change in the structure of NNPC over the past couple of years. We have seen an attempt to make the entire body and really the way that we deal with crude in this country a little bit more transparent. Do you see that time ever happening? Do you see
No,
that? Wow.
because there are demons and godlike
Wow.
activities that
Freshly
take
pressed
place
is now a
in
demonic.
the oil and gas industry. That's the truth about it.
Literally
NNPC,
rubbing the
you want
road now.
audited reports. Even the president can't get audited reports from NNPC. So
Interesting.
I wish the committee good luck. Hopefully, if they're able to sanction this amount of money, we will go again at the turnaround maintenance that we have been doing for the past 2 decades and not getting any results.
Interesting. You talk about not getting results. Let's go talk about gas flaring now, of which we've been gas flaring through all of my life and before that in this country. Most recently, according to the Tribune newspaper, gas flares, how Baru plans to turn waste into dollars. So, it was a stakeholders meeting in Nigeria's oil and gas industry in Houston, Texas, in the United States. This was for the 2018 edition of some offshore technology conference. And we have the chairman, Baru, coming up to say, listen, there's a 3-point smart strategy aimed at ending gas flaring in the nation's oil and gas industry by 2020. Devoe, again, this is rhetoric we've heard before. This is discussion we've heard before. But they are saying that as well as reducing existing gas flares through a combination of targeted policy interventions, they also want to sort of reinvigorate the penalties. But again, in the same story, it does mention that penalties themselves have not really been drivers of investment. Really, more incentives is what we're looking at. But what's your take on this discussion? What happened here?
Well, we're still talking about the almighty oil and gas industry.
Yep.
And it hurts me, even though I know the oil and gas industry is well heeled. You carry yourselves, all the big wigs were in Houston for OTC, that's the annual conference that takes place oil and gas players worldwide. And one of the major topics that they discussed on as regards West African industry was how to bring about the utilization and commercialization of gas in Nigeria, challenges and prospects. I don't think this is new. It's an old topic. It's been a struggle. I think we've had this story before, whereby the issues that were challenging this commercialization had been raised. Now, the Baru, that's the GMB of NNPC, had a 3-point agenda. One had to do with submission of executable gas utilization plans for new future projects in the gas and oil industry, meaning that if they're to sanction a project, it must have an end game as to how it intends to use the gas that comes with it. Because for every gas exploration, there is what they refer to as associated gas, which comes alongside. So it's like when you eat beans, you gas by the side.
Wow.
Okay.
Just
Secondly,
so
Not
graphic.
sure if
Thank you for that, Devoe, this morning.
Secondly-
Some rather colorful imagery.
yes, just to give people how this happens. That's on the second, targeted policy interventions. Thirdly, the reinvigoration of the flare penalties. Now, one of the issues, especially with the policy with the penalty, is that one, it's low, two, it's weak. The charge per, I think per the unit of gas
Unit.
flared is
Yeah.
quite weak,
Yeah.
and it's actually tax deductible. So it means that the companies actually
get their
pay
money
this with
back.
joy, knowing that they're going to get. So if you remove that aspect, maybe it might begin to have a sense of painfulness. Like for example, some operators had to pay some taxes, which came with much pain. But the oil and gas companies are actually looking at this matter with kids' gloves. Now, thirdly, some of the stakeholders, that's like the DPR, did mention, and I think they came out with a categoric position. They said it wasn't about the penalties, rather it should be incentives and investments, because the commercialization of gas has been hindered by the lack of infrastructure. Remember, the operators, they have a duty from a business point of view to exploit and to take out.
Yes.
Now, for you to ask them to create a domestic chain whereby it's used domestically, it requires more investments. The NNPC did point to the fact that the LNG was created as an answer to taking up some of the gas, and already
Okay.
that has been done, and it's almost like I said, almost to our against us, because now all that gas is being exported, and most times before the federal government gets their hands on the money, it takes a process.
It disappears.
So, but I think the way forward, if there is any serious government, gas has been the Midas touch for a lot of the countries in the Middle East. It has supplied power. You know, we've been crying about the lack of power, the lack of generation. We're sitting on excessive capacity, which we haven't utilized.
Shut down last week because
The
Gas,
storms.
absolutely, absolutely.
lack of gas.
Very interesting comments are coming in through here. I've got to take this one by Bolariwa Durujai up on Twitter, who says the NNPC is the major or sole importer of PMS. We are able to pay 145 naira per litre at the pump because the NNPC exchanges more crude for PMS than it would have if we were paying cost-effective pump prices. The subsidy is absorbed as losses in NNPC books. It's an interesting perspective. Very quickly, and talk about this next story, which is in from Daily Times. Well, let's talk a little bit of politics, shall we? Devoe is still staying with you for this. Ekiti, Fayose's deputy Eleka emerges as PDP guber candidate. That's Professor Kolapo Eleka on Tuesday emerged as the PDP governorship candidate for July 14th, 2018 gubernatorial election in the state. It did talk about a ranker-free election. They seem to congratulate themselves quite a lot. What's your take on this, Devoe?
Well, it's quite interesting what's going on, especially on the political scene, especially with the congresses. Like I said, crooked congresses. Now, while ward congresses took place nationwide in the APC, gubernatorial congresses were going on in Ekiti because of their timetable. Now, last week we did see the what's the word to describe this? The Shambo Ward gubernatorial congress that took place on the side of the APC. So, as of then, Fayose had mentioned that this was a bad signal, that the party was going down, and that he had suspected that they intended to also invade their own congress with thugs to show that thuggery and bad congresses was equal and common to all parties. Well, he did his job. I must say, the PDP did hold their congress, and it was quite peaceful and successful. And at the end of the day, we're not hearing any fights or rancor over the outcome of the elections. Now, what you have is that his former, because way before now, he had touted support for his deputy. That was Eleka, that's aka Eleka, and then who was vying against Adeyeye and Senator Abiodun Olujimi, they all have resigned from their positions just to vie for this. Now, you see, what is of note is people should be looking at the outcome of the Ekiti elections. It seems as if there's some level of wisdom and coordination with the PDP all of a sudden. I mean, Fayose has been my man for a long time. You might not like his politics, but he seems to be getting his act together. Apart from the landmark shows of governance as regards the, addressing the herdsmen's issue. I mean, the APC Congress was just a all bash, throwing away and stealing of ballot boxes, whilst the PDP, surprisingly, power to the people, was very sane. And please,
yeah, we don't take political sides here.
Yeah, because I was looking at you.
I was studying and looking at me like I'm some PDP spokesperson.
I am simply just painting the picture.
No, you're waxing
so that people
lyrical.
can, so that people can
You're
actually
going on the
see
PDP high.
how well organized the PDP was.
That's not,
But
it's a lot of
Yeah.
it's a lot of superlatives you're using.
yes,
here,
but
you know?
I actually want people to, apart from the excitement, to count the issues. Now that the candidates are coming forward, we need to put together the issues that we would hold them to account for.
All right.
It is a lot to be entertained and popcorn to go for.
Thank you
but
for
let's
that,
hold the
Devoe.
issues at hand.
And with a couple of seconds left before the show is officially done from the New Telegraph, Codeine, Emzor have reacted to the closure of production site by NAFDAC. They're correcting misinformation that had been put out in the press to say NAFDAC has only temporarily sealed one of Emzor's production sites. That's the liquid line. The rest of Emzor is still operating as normal. Over to you, Ikemesit.
Yeah, interesting that you're correcting the information that NAFDAC put
Yes.
out. Yeah, on that. Yeah. So the initial impression was that all of Emzor's
Emzor was
All the product lines.
Yeah, and that was the question
material,
yesterday.
yeah, and all of that stuff, and yeah, that had social media up in uproar. So that's a little reassuring, even though again the
so
closure of
continue
that
closing
particular
that.
line is still problematic.
Exactly, because
still
there was no
problematic, yeah.
notification
Yeah.
beforehand. They didn't alert
They said they had inspected
Emzor.
5 days before. They were
Yes.
fine with it, and then shortly after the BBC report, they just came back and closed it.
And
And they
shut it
didn't
down.
understand why.
Vexed.
Well, Lagos, I wish we could take more, but we're officially over time.
Insurance for the Codeine diet.
No.
No, Devoe,
Catch an
no.
analyst up on Twitter at Devoe Okorie, at Devoe Okorie, and Ikemesit
Devoe Okorie.
at Judge Bank. Coming up next at 8:15, Laura, where we talk
goodness.
sports. Good morning, Lagos.
Oh Lord, I'm loving that song.
I can't, guys.
I'm loving that song.